You're going into the production of your game and you and your team are starting to create levels. But how do you keep some consistency with the scene layout for those levels? Well, let me introduce you to scene templates. Let's get straight into it. First off, we will create a scene that represents the template you want to create. Now for me, in this example, I have several hierarchy groups where I store some level management, ambient audio, rendering components like light probes, occluders, etc., and then some gameplay and some scenery. Now think of scenery here as static elements and gameplay as the dynamic elements. Obviously, your scene layout will be different, so you do you, but I think you get the point. Anyway, I will empty this out and have a blank scene with just what we want. Now, I like to add iconography to the top level grouping transforms in my hierarchy, and those appear because of the hierarchy icon tool, which I've done a video on and I'll link it in the description. Now for demonstration, I've added a prefab under audio, which will be my ambient audio prefab that then gets overridden as the player moves throughout the level. I will save this scene, and then also I will save it as a scene template. This new object created in the project will be what Unity references when you select to create a new scene. Let's take a look and see what we have. Well, first off, we will see a link to the original scene. And then, because we're good little developers, we will give it a name and a description. Now, because I want this to be the primary choice when I'm selecting a new scene for me and my team, I will select to pin this template, which will make it appear at the top of the dialog. Next, we can add a thumbnail, but as you would have seen, this scene doesn't actually have a camera to it. You see, I load my levels with a single main scene that has the camera and chooses menus, etc. So for the sake of completeness, I just want to show you what that will look like. So I've added this monster here and I've added a camera. Obviously, you won't add a monster to every one of your levels, so it's kind of irrelevant, but I like the look of the monster. Link in the description if you want to pick him up for yourself. Now, if I make a template from this and I go to click the thumbnail to take a snapshot, we get a thumbnail that shows us the monster. And obviously, if we go to make a new scene, we get that thumbnail popping up. You see how it works. Anyway, let's chuck that and go back to our original template. The next two parts are pipeline and dependencies, and I'm going to cover those in a moment. But first, I want to show you what happens when we use this template. So let's try making a scene from the template. And here we can find our first gotcha. Notice there is a folder next to the new scene. And if we open it, whoops, we appear to have had a load of objects been created in the project. Upon closer inspection, we can see that mixtures and textures, they've all been added along with our new level. And also a new version of the audio prefab. You can see here if I go to the level and click the original, we can see where that is. Now jumping back to our template and looking at the dependency section, we can see why. All those objects that are selected are marked to clone. So let's change that and we'll try creating a scene again. This time round, no folder, just a clean new scene. And selecting that audio prefab shows it linked to the original. Great. Now I want to show you a gotcha. And I know it's gotten several devs out there and had them properly confused. You decide to take an existing scene to use as a template. Before you do, you delete all the bespoke elements and get it down to its bare bones. You then save it as a new scene and then save it as a template. Exactly the same as we've already done. But looking closer at that template, you'll notice a massive amount of dependencies. How come? We deleted everything, didn't we? We look back in the scene and we can see, yes, it's fairly empty. However, we baked this scene for lighting. And if we look in the lighting tab, we'll see light maps, which in turn have dependencies on the objects they bake. So once we save the scene, we should clear out the light map details. But here is an advanced step. I don't want to recreate the base settings for my lighting every time. So instead, I'll select to clone the light map settings in the template. Now, whenever I create a new scene using this template, it will clone a new lightmap settings data file in the project, and I can use that as a default, ready to be tweaked in this new scene. Okay, so that's the end of it. We've done templates and they've created scenes. But hang on, there was an extra option in the scene template for the pipeline. And we do love pipelines on this channel. Well, clicking on the Create button will give us a new script, and this script will run whenever we make a new scene. Now for me, I like to ask the user whether they would like to save the scene upon its creation, and then add it into the build settings. And in one of my games, I also asked them if they would like to add the level to the selection option in the main menu. But let's go over saving and putting into the build settings. Let me show you how it works. First, we'll look at that class. It uses the scene template pipeline interface, so Unity knows it's a class for those templates. The isValid template for instantiation is used to tell the dialog whether to display this template or not. The before method will run before the scene is instantiated, and conversely, and the one we're interested in changing, the after method will be called when the scene has been instantiated. Now the code I'm going to create is pretty boilerplate editor code, and I've run over it several times before, so I'm going to really go through it here. First, let's ask the user if they want to save the scene, just with a standard dialog. If they do, then we'll open a save file panel and ask them where they want to save it. Then for saving, we get the resultant path and save it using the save scene method from the editor scene manager class. We just make sure that's a relative path. Now I refresh the database and we move on to adding it to the build. Now this is a bit convoluted, but basically we get all the current scenes in the build and we put this one on the end. And then we set that back into the editor build settings. Creating a new scene from the template, and we can see that script in action. We ask the user if they want to save, we ask them where, and then we add it to the build settings, as you can see here in the window. Now as stated with this pipeline, you could do a lot more. For instance, you could ask the user more questions like drop prefabs into the scene and tailor it as the user creates it. Let me know in the comments what you would do on your scene templates as they start up. And that's it. Scene templates to get your levels off to a consistent start. Talking of consistency, if you like this video, then I'm sure you're going to keep that consistency running by liking the next.